Welcome, everybody, to the Court of UberCube. We have Judge Miyagic presiding. And here today, we have a serious case. Mr. Anthony Adams, a.k.a. Uberbear, you are hereby accused of replacing 59 cards. Not 58, not 60, but 59 cards to add synergies, cut power outliers, and to reset the EDH brain. So these are serious charges, and this court takes this kind of activity extremely seriously. I would like to know, first of all, how do you respond to these charges?
You don't know what it's like just walking around every day, just trying to represent the Cube community and having Commander players walking up to you. Do you want to play Commander?
Do you think they can handle it?
I don't think they can handle the Cube.
You can't handle the Cube.
You can't handle the Cube.
Order in the court.
That's it. Welcome to UberCube, the podcast we discuss all things Cube, but with refreshments and legends.
Refreshments and legendary refreshments.
Yes. Let's start out with, before we go down this topic, down this wormhole that we're about to create of a conversation about legends, let's talk about our very special guest that hasn't been on the show quite a while.
My name is Nathan Black. I am I was going to say creator, adapter of the legendary cube into the almost legendary cube.
I like that. The adapter, the cube adapter.
The calibrator.
Yes, the refiner.
And who else do we have on here besides, she's lovely, she knows who she is, and she has a very green screen.
Hi, it's me, May, also known as Magic.
And then we have this beautiful, can't handle the cube gentleman to the left of me.
Hi, it's Stu. How y'all doing? Thank you for coming and hanging out with us.
I'm doing swell. This is Anthony, a.k.a. Uberbear. We're just hanging out. We're going to have a little bit of good time. And for those that just listened to that scene that I hope made it, it is from the movie A Few Good Men with Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise.
And Herman Munster.
And this is one of those weird movies that they made us watch in basic training and used it kind of saying, you shouldn't talk to an officer that way. You do not behave that way. That is not how a courtroom is held. It was, yes. It was used as a brainwashing
sounds
tool.
Sounds miserable, I'll be honest.
It was.
It sounds bloody awful.
But I can, just to assure the listeners, I can now handle the cube. So
let's hope so, because we got a doozy today. So as Mr. Black alluded to, this discussion today is going to be around the almost legendary cube. So for transparency, this was a cube that, as Nathan mentioned, is an adaptation of a cube. Do you remember the original cube curator of the almost legendary cube?
Of the legendary cube?
Yes.
I actually do not remember the name. It was just called Legendary Cube.
So May and I actually talked about an episode in the past, and this is gonna be a multifaceted episode. This seriously will be, because there's so many different topics that are going to break off from what we're doing here. So if you're thinking, I'm just going to get a drill down on a particular cube, the answer is absolutely not. Matter of fact, we're going to have a hard time not going left field, right field, center field. It's going to be all over the place, so bear with us. There's a lot of things to break down and cover about this.
There is.
But I will encourage you to listen to, and I will include it in the show notes, May and I in particular, and I believe you're a part of this too, we talked about the benefits of cloning a cube.
Absolutely.
And that's going to kind of spawn a lot of this conversations. And before we go any further down this rabbit hole that we're about to do, and it's going to get a little nuts in here, people, right? We're going to handle the cube. What are we having to drink? Our good friend Nathan, you start us out.
All right. Well, I'm having a nice bottled water. And that's pretty much all I've got right now.
It's early. It's Friday. May, what about yourself? What you got jamming today?
I am also doing a healthy choice this time. Trying to cut back a little bit on the drinking. I feel like that it'll be generally good for my health. So I'm just going to stick to some tea for a bit. And today's tea is mango green tea.
That's a lot healthier than what I've got.
Yeah, I'm going to I gotta just go right off that, because she's right. I am also having tea, but then I also put some Crown Royal Peach in it. What are you having?
So I decided today's choice is going to be this Fat Boy Baltic Porter from the Old Mecklenburg Brewery here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this is a first for me, not going to lie. I don't think I've ever had one of these before, so I'm excited to see what it's all about.
All right, as we kind of talked about before we went into Nathan, before we just start breaking this cube down and zigging and zagging, Could you just kind of tell us a little bit of the historical? What is this cube all about? What are we dealing with here before we start breaking it down and talking about the things that will apply to the listeners?
Absolutely. So I built the Legendary Cube. When it came to building cubes, this was the first one I'd ever done. So I decided to take the advice of actually some of your earlier podcasts where you talked about cloning a cube. And I thought, you know what, I could definitely do this. And I found this one that I really liked. It was similar to my wheelhouse, which has always been Commander. And so it was like, okay, something legendary. All right, well, what about, trying to see legends of all the different colors and then trying to use that as a restriction, like, hey, we'll do just legendary. And then eventually, like we talked about, and we talked about this in the last time that we met about this one. But yeah, just the restriction of legendary only became kind of difficult to get around. So we started finding things that were helpful to legends. And so I really have a couple things in there that are not legendary. Of course, like, sorceries, instants, those sorts of things are not going to be legendary, and not every single thing is. That's why I called it the almost legendary cube, because I was able to adapt a lot of things that I enjoyed about Commander into 1v1 format like this.
We've had not a lot, but a fair number of play tests with this cube. We've had some back porch magic. We've hung out. We need to get some more iterations in. But kind of just do a little bit of fast feedback, kind of the tone. We talked about this in previous episodes. We talked about the Jitte incident. And this was,
yes.
Well, we won't hold listeners down with that idea, but the Jitte of this is that you had residual components of the original cube that you had cloned. And the original cube really did stick to the bit, as in it was pure legendary. And it was a neat cube, and if the owner of this original cube is listening, it's a really cool cube. But as you've mentioned, you wanted to tailor this cube to be Nathan, right? You wanted it to be Nathan. I mean, That's ultimately what it was. But then you presented Nathan to your play group, like all of your Commander vibes, and that's kind of the breakdown here. And it's not meant to be, that tone sounds accusatory. That's not what I mean. It's just it's what you were used to for a tone and pacing of Magic. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. I used to play 60-card Magic back in the olden days when that was all there was. And I mean, even when I played in that, I would play 4-player games. We'd treat it like a Commander game. We were all playing and trying to do this sort of a group thing. So so I kind of was thinking about that pacing when it came to designing the cube, because thinking of 1v1, I just wasn't as used to that. So.
Right. So now we've taken your cube, and yes, we've played 8-person pod type of scenario, right? But it will be featured at UberCubeathon, which will take a fast second. I've talked about that ad nauseum at this point, but on April 26th, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, at the Gathering Place, tickets are on sale. It's going to be 64 players, 17 cubes, and the first place prize, in addition to the actual prize support, gets a ticket to CubeCon for 2025. The winner does, in addition to a copy altered Rob Alexander Taiga that's also signed. I put that up on the Bluesky and Twitterverse today.
Prizes are pretty outrageous, let's be honest, for UberCubeathon. I mean, it's well worth the price of admission.
So we're going to cut that commercial right there. We're just going to end that because the listeners are going to be like, it's enough of that. We get it, right? But there's a point to that. Because you're going to be at UberCubeathon, we are now in the, how do we take this cube that was very much formatted around kind of, you had the pacing of the games were long-winded, for lack of better terms. We know this. And now I'm telling you, you have to go under this umbrella of 55 minutes, give or take an hour, that you have to complete these 3 matches, best of 2 out of 3 scenario. And how do people avoid draws? That's where we're at. Not that I want to make our cubes based around the speed equivalents, but how promptly can a person finish this game? What can they expect, right? So that's kind of where we're at. Anything to add before we progress?
Just that it was featured in last year's UberCubeathon, the very first time. And it did okay, but that same sort of notes were just that it was a little slower paced. It took people a little while to kind of get into it. Again, it was a Commander mindset, and people who play Cube a lot of times are more likely to be drafters than Commander players, at least early on. That was my impression.
I will
so
say
they
that
definitely didn't see all that.
Yeah, I will say that sometimes I'm not mad about that, about it being a little slower, because I've been to events where we've played multiple cubes in a day. We go all the way back to the cube cons, and we've talked about, you've got the 3 cube drafts for the main event, and then we're going back to the hotel room and playing more cubes. Like, that can get pretty intense and pretty, it's a lot of time to be spending playing Magic. So I don't mind the vibe of a cube that takes a little longer. Maybe it's not quite as suitable for an event like that. But for the fun aspect of just having an experience like that that's available for your group, or even for an event like that where, hey, you've got this cube, it's not going to be over in an hour. It might be an hour and a half. It could be 2 hours. Expect longer drawn out games. Expect it to be a little more in that commandery kind of, vibe and play style. Definitely want to sort of put that on the record that there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And we're not trying to say that.
Yeah, I want to be clear about that too.
It's not just that you're the onus is on the curators that you have to curate the cube to be suitable, or that it's necessary to have this time limitation.
You don't need speed, but when you get into these events, and I'm going to present a question to May in a minute, because she'll be an expert on this idea. You have a cube that follows this type of pacing. How do you overcome a clock, right? When you're featured at an event, and let's just say any of our listeners goes to KubeCon 2025 next year and their cube is featured, right? You do have to ask yourself, well, will the players be able to complete, right? Because draws are fine when we're playing kitchen table Magic, we're hanging out with our peers, or sitting around the barbecue or whatever. No one even cares. Like, time doesn't mean anything. Sam and I had a game last night that was super intricate, amazing. Everybody else finished, but our game was so intense. We're playing chess. We don't want to stop. It felt good, and it was a really strong game. And the aggro players have already done their thing, and that's that timing, right? May, my question for you, and we'll use the Fey Cube as an example. How do you beat time?
The short answer is you need to have cards that close the game. You need to have bombing cards, and when you have a slower environment. You need to have cards that break parity. You need to have cards that essentially can slingshot those little bit of incremental leads that you've been collecting for the rest of the game into a closing game state. So, knowing that, I actually have a follow-up question for Nathan. When you think of your almost legendary cube, what are your top 5? Just doesn't have to be one for each color, but just your top 5. These are cards that help close the game in this environment.
Top 5. Let's see. I definitely would say, Reanimator is something I love. And, that involves, high costing cards. So, good old Grizzleband is always fun to finish a game out. But of course, Emrakul also, the 13 mana Emrakul is a really good game finisher.
It promises the end. Let's say that. Emrakul does promise the end.
It sure does. It is the promised end. So yeah, those are some of my favorites, just because I love to be able to throw those things out. And then I really there was a card that was, I'm going to blank on the name of it right now, but it was originally in the Street Fighter. It was a Ken's card for Street Fighter, and I can't think of it. I have the Universe's
I know exactly what you're talking
within
about.
version of it. Yeah. But I love that it has a couple different elements of. I wish I could see it in front of myself, but I should have it in myself. But it has just a couple elements of it has prowess. It has just a lot of different. It falls into a bunch of different categories, which I really like about that card. It could be aggro. It could also be spells matter. It just does a lot of things. So I would say those 3 for sure. Coming up with the other 2 might be tough.
That's okay, because there's a reason for this, right? So the list of 5 is difficult, right? I couldn't do that either. Not really. Sometimes you could. I think the promised end, these type things, right? They're big. So we're going to do an anonymous time and an anonymous place, because I'm going to name a situation that occurred without giving time, date, stamp, or location. Okay. So Nathan, don't squeak. So there was a time where we drafted this cube, and you had a person that was drafting the cube with you. And one of them did not have a positive, they were very out loud, they were not positively speaking of this environment. They did not align with how they see Magic to align with them, in so many words, right? They just weren't having a good time. And without going into details about that, what that prompted for me is, one, your feelings were impacted by that. Nobody wants to really hear that feedback, just out of place, not contextual, problem-oriented, not solution type thing, right? And I understand some players have a habit of doing that. The proverbial, this card is trash. Well, it's one thing if the card is trash when it doesn't align with their deck, and one, I just think this card is trash, right? And that's just not something that, we've talked about that before. That's kind of an etiquette thing. There's a delivery to that, right? You can have a conversation with someone, I don't think this matches the cube goals. Here's my reason why. So that prompted what's going to happen next. And we kind of alluded to this with the JP episode where you guys laughed only 59 cards. Well, I was having some sleeping problems. So based on what had occurred, and the conversation and that interaction that happened during that time date stamp, which you can probably get from my Cube Cobra stuff, I decided I'm just going to take a look at this cube, see what this person is talking about. What was the exchange that happened here? What can I do? And I started looking at your cube. And I'm going to keep this like high level when I started stepping through it. So when I look at a cube, I kind of want to look at what are we dealing with? Is there a soul ring? Is there a jitte? Is there a skull clamp? I know I'm naming all the usual. Do they have power? You know, what are we dealing with? Like what's our bandwidth here?
Where are the outliers?
Yeah, that gives me a good way of what should be the inliers, right? Where's the inner band lie? And I use that as a prompt. And as I'm kind of scrolling through your colors, I said, well, one thing I want to talk about is because I know Nathan loves Commander. And what's one thing Commander likes to do? I'm just going to ask an open-ended question. What's one thing that Commander likes to do more than anything else? Let's see if you guys can get this. Generic question. What happens most in Commander? May, what's the thing?
Creatures turning sideways?
Nope. But it's true. Things go boom. Board wipes and wraths. It isn't... How many turns do you go by in a game of Commander that go, well, I've got something to deal with this? You always know when a Commander player is going to get that alpha strike in. They're like, oh, I'm going to turn this 2/3 sideways, and that 1/1 right there has been sitting here literally doing nothing. And then boom.
Here's the thing that I think that Commander players do that doesn't really translate to Cube. And that is value engine, expensive payoff. Specifically in that order. Where... in Commander, the game's going to be slow enough that you're going to be able to like build your little engine, touch a bunch of cards, and do the thing, and then eventually get into your late game and play your big explosive payoff play that's, oh, I did my engine thing, now here's my I win the game card. And while there are like bombing cards that exist in draft, obviously, a lot of them are a lot more insular when it comes to how they function. It is a lot harder to build like intricate engines that, you know, last throughout a game in this environment because games should typically be faster paced. Not all environments, obviously. That's like the whole point of like the Live the Dream Cube as an example. But what's important to note about that is that it is a particular playstyle that Commander players tend to gravitate towards, but doesn't always transfer into draft.
So what I was getting to, though, is I'm going to stick with Wraths. I'm like, I know Nathan, I've known him for a long time. He does love Commander. It's something he enjoys. Commander is fun. It's something he wants to do. You do it on Sundays. You have another group. And it's something you do, and you enjoy it very much. And so what would a Commander player like? I'm using exactly what May just said. Like, what do they enjoy? And I'm using that as kind of my baseline for my kind of looking at this cube to figure out what the shakeout is. And I noticed, I said, well, I'm going to focus on Wraths. How many do you have? Because this just happened to me. I had a cube that had a lot of them. And I'm like, I'm just going to kind of float through and see everything that qualifies through a raft. And after a while, this is a 360 cube. I think I ended at 14. I literally stopped at 14. I'm like, holy cow, there are 14 various board wipes, reset, stop, stall, let's start over type of stuff in here. And that's something that translates very well to Commander, and that's what you're used to. And you feel free to stop me, but this is what started what happens next. So do you have anything to add before I continue?
No, I think that's I was looking at it at those long games where you're like, okay, well, somebody's developed an advantage. I've got to go ahead and wipe the board so that I can get caught up again. And these games aren't that long. And so I mean, originally, yeah, there were definitely some that I like. I really like the way they looked, and that's one thing that we've talked about in the past about how you can have pet cards, and you've been like, I really went to go find the best version of this card. Please don't cut it. I really like it because it's such a pretty card. But when it doesn't fit into the whole environment, that's it's obviously a reason to make that change.
So I'm sitting there. It's late at night. It's probably, I don't know, it's probably 3 a.m. I can't sleep. And I've already found these 14. And I'm like, how do I communicate this, Nathan? I don't want to type this up. I really didn't want to sit there and type it up. And I didn't want to explain it. I'm like, well, I'll just use Cube Cobra as a platform. So this is the next step. This is why we had our little bit in the beginning that I hope actually makes it. But this is where you can't handle the cube, and I'm the bad guy in this story. So I'm like, well, it'd be a lot easier for me to show them what I'm talking about and explain my logic if I just used a platform that Gwen Decker's made for us is so great. I'm going to clone his cube. And I just did it because I ain't got time to sit around and write a letter. So I cloned it, I copied it, and then I just said, I'm going to cut out all these board wipes, and I'm going to write up a little. And I still have this clone cube. I will share it in the show notes side by side with yours just so people can see my notes. So I'm doing annotations on my cuts. And I'm explaining, understanding Nathan and how he thinks and how he feels about Magic. I want to be also very sensitive to him being the curator or the proprietor of this current version of the cube. I don't want to be disrespectful, but I want to provide a logical trail that he can decide if this is the best fit. Long short of this, I don't want to be a cube bully, and that's easy to do, right? Like it's like being the alpha player in a cooperative game. Like, you should make this move because this is how the party wants, and you're like, well, the party didn't even talk about it.
It's less bully of Cube. It's more mayor of Magicville.
I want to be mayor at Magicville, but I want to do this with. Well, I take that, but I want this to be structured. Nathan, I want your honest opinion before I proceed. How did you feel about my write-ups that I did for him? Did it bug you? Give the honest thing. Tell the story. Go ahead.
Well, it kind of blindsided me, to be totally honest with you, because I built Almost Legendary. We'd had a bunch of games with it, and it played pretty well for our friends, and I hadn't heard a lot from it. And then again, I had that negative experience, and again, that was sort of that like you mentioned before, where he. The person said that that they didn't have fun. They said, "Oh, it's just a bunch of stupid legends," and didn't really elaborate. So that doesn't help you. I absolutely love constructive criticism, because that's the only way you can really move forward. And kind of going off on a tangent a little bit, but yeah, I was a little blindsided and hurt at first. And then after I kind of like digested it, because I went to the gym right afterwards, so I was just like, can't believe he would just out of the blue just want to change. I was like, this is my cube, and I got really defensive. And then when I actually took time afterwards and just read through all the changes options, I was like, right. He's right, dang it.
Yeah, so my delivery,
this is going to make it better.
This is an opportunity people to learn. So my delivery was poor. One, I posted it to the, I don't know why, I was tired. I posted it to our general Raleigh chat that we have in our UberCube Discord, right? So, because we all talk about this.
Oh, you never go public with cube criticism of someone else's cube. Come on, Anthony.
You do.
That's a rookie mistake. You've got to DM that first.
In our friend circle?
Oh, you've got to DM that first.
Okay, I'll accept that. So
you wanted to position yourself as the bad guy, so now I'm gonna give you the hell, justified or otherwise.
So wave one was the wraths were heavy. That's it. And I just like, all right, well, this is what I kind of using. There's no particular framework. Doesn't make me the arbiter of all things cube. I just said like, this is a lot for 360. So I used the board wipes as my baseline, and I put annotations and my logic and reasoning for each one of them. My delivery was poor. It was poor etiquette for me to just put it in our group without permission. That I admit to. I didn't see any harm in it, because I receive it with such frequency from, well, hell, all of you. Like, you need to change this card, and this is no good. And what if you had this? And I just thought, well, what if you had these 59 cards, Matt? Nathan? But all jokes aside, I did this in like degrees that made sense to me in the middle of the night. So let's do wraths, and let's do what does mid-range look like? What does aggro look like? What does a control set look like? And following what I believe the principles of the cube. Like, it has to be legendary or legendary adjacent, some support cards. So I went through and checked a bunch of cards, and we'll talk about some of those. But one of the things that you said initially, and this conversation's kind of coming to a close, and yes, I did do 59 cards in my iteration, and I just gave you, I thought it was so much easier to go, here's my ideas, here's what I think could be swapped out. Instead of writing a giant Word document or an Excel document, why not use the platform? This is where I was at. And I just kind of got crazy and kept going. You said, and this was kind of, if I keep making these changes, the cube will no longer feel like mine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
At which point, our good friend Christian just happened to be sitting to the right of me and could hear the conversation. He goes, well, Anthony and Chris looked at my cube and they provided this. You remember this dialogue kind of happened. It wasn't like the sit down thing, but he's sharing his experience where we looked at his Bant enchantment cube and had a similar, not so public, not so broad, not a cloning incident, by the way. It wasn't the attack of the clones, but it was very much like, why are you running this card? This card, you just stack and topple and everybody knocks it down. And he had made that cube from the ground up. And he was very honest and sincere about when we first said, well, you need to have something that this cube just, at the time, the first iteration, it lacked a degree of dynamicism in that.
It was basically Voltron.cube, and it was not an enjoyable experience, in my opinion, when we played that Bant enchantment cube early on. And yeah, you're right, that was Christian's, not his first foray into cube building, but it was one that he decided he was passionate enough about the mechanics to put together. And he will admit, even to this day, he's like, I know this is not everybody's favorite cube. I mean, it's probably
it's amazing
At the time, it's probably not my favorite cube right now, but it's definitely increased in enjoyment and playability since its first iteration. I think the first iteration was pretty bad, but it needed a lot of feedback to get it where it is now.
So, May, we're taking this down the path of feedback right now and how to process that. We've talked about this over and over again, and I'm going to defer to May and Nathan on this. But essentially, if you take it way back, the first time that I presented UberBear's Artifact Cube, and I'm watching it live on camera, and it's being played, and all jokes aside, and it's been made fun of, and it's kind of almost my little internal meme is Collector Oath, right? And I'm watching this live, just like borderline breaking games, and I'm like, oh my God. And it was Justin Parnell and Andy Mangold, and they're calling it, and I'm like, I mean, I'm seeing it, I just never, and I had been warned by Chris at that point over and over again that Collector Oath was unhealthy for that environment, all jokes aside. And I literally dismissed it as just I think it was a 2-2 or a 2-1. I don't even have it in front of me because it's dead to me. It can die to anything. And literally the card says, I hate your cube.
I think it's a 2-3 even.
The card says, I hate your design.
Yes.
It says that on there.
It does.
But it dies to everything. Why not, right? So I felt the same feel as you did, but I'm doing this live on camera at CubeCon in a different mode of presentation. So May, feedback. I'm admitting my delivery was wrong. We'll start with that. But regarding feedback and how do you process it, what advice do you give to Nathan or listeners or anybody about how to deal with something like this? Do you have any wisdom?
Yeah. So typically how I deal with feedback, and I relate to everybody here. I've gotten a large amount of feedback regarding just whatnot of whatever I'm building, right? And the big important part of this is being selective about your feedback. We talked about it forever ago, where it's the concept of someone calls you a horse the first time, then, you're just going to shrug it off. Second time is like, okay, that's weird, but, I'm still not a horse. But then third time you start being like, maybe I'm a horse.
You can't handle the horse.
But my point is that it's important to be able to identify the pattern and identify the emotions that are behind the criticism. Because surface level is word for word what they're saying and how they feel of this card bad, this feeling bad, this whatever bad. And the reality is that they're feeling those emotions because they had some kind of negative experience. They didn't feel like that they were able to fulfill whatever archetype that they were trying to build into, whatever deck that they were trying to build into, whatever art strategy that they tried going into felt punished or whatnot. They left with the feels bad, and now they're immediately coming to you being like, hey, why are these cards here? They feel miserable. What the right? And noting the emotion behind that and the intent behind that is more important than the actual substance of their criticism, so to speak. That's not to say completely ignore any advice anybody gives to you and just note how they feel and how that makes you feel, right? It's more of the detecting that pattern of, I noticed that these particular cards cause this particular feeling amongst this amount of people, right? And when you're able to assign that kind of play experience off of what criticism that you're getting, from there you're able to identify what the pattern is, and then from there you can assess whether or not that is a good pattern, something that you want to be identifiable for your cube, or if it is a bad pattern because it is something that people aren't expecting, people aren't wanting to play against, people are not wanting to play with, whatnot. To ground it a little bit, let's take Fractured Sanity, right? So, Mill has a lot of feelings from
I love
people.
it.
Yeah,
I
totally.
can't handle the Mill.
But because Mill has this weird axis that it attacks on, it kind of leaves people with sometimes these bad feels. So, when I was first getting a lot of the feedback for Fractured Sanity, a lot of that Mill package was kind of more criticized of, well, Mill's not fun because X, Y, and Z, and it was easy to dismiss some of the concerns by just placating it to, people tend to hate Mill. People tend to overreact to Mill because they're like, oh, you got rid of my good card. I wanted to play that. And when push came to shove, and Fractured Sanity was still in the fake cube, it quickly became a mistake because no other cards became relevant at that point. It was no longer a matter of this is the pattern of how somebody feels that led up to that kind of conclusion, but rather this specific isolated case is causing that feel bad for everyone involved, therefore it needs to go. The person who was playing Fractured Sanity was having a bad time because it took away any sort of agency that they had with their deck building, where it's just like, none of the rest of the cards in my deck matter so long as I have Fractured Sanity, way to replay Fractured Sanity and whatnot. And the people playing against it felt like they couldn't really do anything. But the reason that I'm specifically targeting this example is because when you are getting feedback, it's tricky to navigate whether or not it is just because of what people are feeling or if it's that specific isolated case. And that's my advice, is be very precise on what information you're tracking from the criticism.
So I want to kind of take this back a little bit. So Nathan, this is your second cube now. You have, right? You have a Ghostbusters cube that we're going to talk about soon too, which is...
I do. I'd love to talk about that sometime.
I know you are, because this one's more of a case study. That one is more of, and we'll definitely going to talk about that. I actually want to talk about it very soon, because that one is now you doing emergent design, taking a thematic build, and now having learned from this first iteration, because there is a degree of you, when you clone, you have accepted the sins of the past or the sins of the fathers, right? Whatever they take on. And because the assumption is because someone else did it, it must be right. Right. And to them, it was right. You have to take in all the like environmental context. Maybe these people like playing with this type of scenarios, whatever, right? Say in the case of Fractured Sanity or something, like maybe that was in the cube, hypothetically. Well, now you've cloned it, and now my group hates Mill, because Mill sucks, right? And because it does.
Mill is wonderful.
It's terrible.
You do not say that about Mill anymore.
So
I actually really like Mill because it's so hard to win with that I actually give people
no, it's not that hard to win with.
Kudos. It's not as hard to win with.
It's really not that hard to win with, but yeah, sure. But yeah, sure. The only reason why the reason why you win, you know why you win with Mill is because I lost. You know why I lost? Because I didn't play against you. But let's move on. So. Because I could go all day with this one.
Getting a little derailed.
Oh, yeah.
Very passionate
I
feelings.
got a lot of words that start with F and end with K in the mill. But so
fire truck to put out
point.
Fire truck.
I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. It's a mill episode. You guys have milled my episode. So I hate mill. But unless I'm self-milling, which is awesome, by the way. But moving on. When we kind of talked about this, what I observed based on the original thing that you received, that feedback from that time period, from that person, and we had kind of quietly vocalized it, but frankly, you hadn't had enough reps at that point. There's a point where people are saying things like, we're not trying to like squeeze your power bands and break your cube and all that, but the idea of taking feedback is something that we all learn. It's not always easy the first time. So when I started cropping this back, I started offering suggestions. I wrote them out, I typed out a lot of lists, and I'll share that clone with everybody as we talked about before. But I started looking at some of these components and trying to really get a feel. I know the person during that scenario didn't deliver that message very well, but I was wondering, what's their side of the story, right? Where is this coming from? What pieces they're seeing? And then I started seeing stuff and I'll use some examples without going into it, like Mirari Conjecture, which I think is like a 5-mana, 3-turn based, I don't know, was it like some kind of saga-ish type thing that would take forever?
Yeah.
You're looking at really if you cast it on curve turn 8. And this was the type of commander card, so I was tripping across. So I took Mirari's Conjecture and I said, well, that's terrible. And he likes Reanimator. Let's throw in Consider.
Do you know when the Mirari Conjecture is really good? When you play it on turn 5 after you've wiped the board on turn 4.
With your 14 board wipes.
Exactly.
This was the problem that I was
We're making 5-drops relevant in a world where there's way too many, not just even in our play group, but there's a lot of emphasis on this aggressive 1 and 2 mana creature, and
well,
that's
funny you should mention that. There. This is a topic that we've had an exchange this week, and we're gonna some other stuff. We're gonna talk about mana drain in a minute. This was a topic you guys wanted to cover, but Nathan and I were kind of talking about let me ask a question to the audience. We went off the topic again. This is a general idea. So picture this cube for all of you listening, including the people here right now, is not as a cube but as a deck. We're gonna make a 360 card deck, and can you hypothetically, in this magical 3 commander deck stocked on top of each other, just giant stack. Picture the biggest pancake stack you've ever seen. Could you make a curve that made sense? Could you curve it? How would you do it? What approach?
The entire cube?
Yeah. What would your curve look like?
Do you have to?
No, but it's a question. Could you have X amount of 1-drops in this section, X amount of 2-drops in this section, X amount? May, do you see where I'm going with this? Could you pancake this?
So I can actually piggyback off of what you're implying here, because a big part of kind of set design, cube design, whatnot, is how do you expect players to curve out? And when we're looking at your environment, our big question is, what is our early games going to look like? And you have like a critical density of lots of interaction pieces, lots of things like counterspell, removal. You have a few different things that can like set up your graveyard for things like reanimate and whatnot. And a lot of your early game plays are more centered around kind of setting up for these like late game hitters without a lot of like relevant early threats to kind of keep pressure on that or to interact with. And it's not to say that, how do I put it? We mentioned before and several times that aggro is important for a cube's identity because it represents kind of the threshold of what people can get away with. And it's not to say that we expect you to like, we need you to shove in an entire aggro package or anything, but there's a sort of meat and potatoes that comes with it, right? You have a lot of this early game interaction, but what are you interacting with? And sure, we could take it as we're giving you a sort of criticism, if you want to take it that way. But I am more trying to frame it as this is a recommendation because it's kind of the expected play. And if you are not looking to go into what are my early plays that I'm going to interact with, what are people curving into? What are their engines going to look like to kind of get them all into roughly the same spot as, say, Reanimator? Because you did like a really good job of like setting up all this Reanimator stuff. There's a clear like end goal. There's reanimate targets. There's a way to get them in the graveyard. There's clear. Here's my step 1, step 2, step 3. Big stupid thing to win the game, right?
Like Mill.
Go back there, huh?
Every time I mention it, it like hurts his soul.
It's okay. Anthony's microphone is going to be muted for the next 5 minutes. He's not allowed to talk about Mill anymore. Time out, Anthony. Got a time out.
But my point is that when you're looking at your cube and you're thinking about the curve, what is your goal?
No, I mean, it makes sense to try to make sure that if you're setting up those plays. And I think one of the restrictions that I've been dealing with, and as we've talked about before, is legendaries. And there's not, believe it or not, in some of the colors, there's just not a lot of, and Anthony saw this too, not a lot of really good early plays.
He is right. Following the theme, your restriction is powerful, but it does. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to validate you, you're 100% correct. Like I'm like, how do we get 1-drops in this cube, right? And what are they? And that's the problematic thing that you're doing with this restriction. Same thing that air quotes, pauper, peasant, whatever. I joked about it, but like say, ladies looking left, and you've made your own like situation where you must now follow it, right? So the legendary bit is real, it's really good, but how do you make an aggro package when it doesn't exist yet in printing?
Right. And, cards like, some of these vanilla cards, they actually printed a new vanilla card in Aether Drift, which I thought was awesome. 2 for a 3/3. So it's got great stats on it too. But, everybody's so focused on evasion and things that the cards can do that, like, when you see vanilla, you kind of are like, oh, this is boring. And you just keep passing it. And so, the sacrificing these cards that are on the higher mana curve that actually do something for something on a lower mana curve that does nothing, it's hard. It's hard to make that decision,
It is. Actually, I have a point here. So the cards that I'm going to have listed, and they'll be included in the show notes, are Isamaru, Hound of Kanda, and Sundial, Dawn Tyrant. Both very vanilla. One's a 2/2, one's a 3/3. Normally, I understand what you say, or what you're saying, because you talked about it. Typically, players, when they look at a card, they want it to do things. That's the day and age of Magic that we're at. And there's a cited example that you gave to me in this conversation, which we'll reflect upon in a minute. Was it you cut Isamaru because you put X in there? What was that card?
It was the new Basri from Aether Drift.
And you put it in there.
It's a 1-mana creature.
It's a 1-mana 2/1 that has, like, it makes cats or something.
Right.
Isamaru, Hound of Kanda, is a 1-mana 2/2. But you and I understand the logic. I'm guilty of this myself. Not even guilty is not the word. We all do it. Isamaru doesn't say anything else. I'm just a 2/2 beater. That's what I do. The art is sick, by the way. And you put the other one because it has the potential to make cats, maybe sometimes, probably not never. It's just a 2/1. I mean, let's just be honest, right? It has an ability.
It also has cycling. It does have a cycling ability, too.
Sure. But
may not matter that much, but...
And then Sundial Dawn Tyrant is for 1 colorless and a plains. You get a 3/3. It's construct. I actually looked at this from Artifact Cube, because I'm restructuring mine. I have the same challenges. Do I need to challenge the machine decks, the late game, allowing people just to do whatever they want and go ham, right? And as May said, and we've talked about this before, Stu and I are openly not pro. I guess we're not pro aggression for the reasons that we actually like to do the complex decks, but the aggression serves a purpose of the ballast point to make sure that we can't just do whatever we want when we want. We're not playing solitaire Magic. We're going to be challenged. Now add on top of all this where you have this restriction of it must be legendary. I've looked at Scryfall. You are exceptionally limited. Going back to the point, I made some suggestions. We're not going to talk about that, going down the rabbit hole here, but Isamaru still is a 1-drop, 2/2. Still does exactly the end game, because the ultimate game is to win. It does the same thing as the one you talked about before. That's the 2/1 that, sure, you cycle it. But if you're cycling it your late game, you're trying to find a solution anyways. You see where I'm going with this? It's kind of apples, potatoes, meat, something. They're not great. They're not fun, but they do exactly what that type of person that's drafting that. Okay. I'm just kidding.
Let me state my position on this. First of all, and as a less experienced curator of 2 incomplete cubes, 1 may be complete, but we'll bypass that sentiment for now. One thing that I dislike, and I don't know if this is something that exists either in EDH or in constructed formats or whatever the case may be, that aggro needs to exist purely for the fact that there has to be a speed check benchmark for other decks in order to ensure that the decks that you have built into the archetypes within your cube can exist on this plateau, on this speed plateau, right? Why does aggro have to be that benchmark? Someone explain this to me.
It's not.
Because I dislike, but I hear this all the time, right? I hear, I have to have aggro in the cube because otherwise all the other archetypes that I've built in will be able to just go and do their thing. Well, why don't you want those decks
I'm using
to
that
do
to declare the idea, but frankly, players enjoy it. That's it. That's all there is to it. There's no other, I can make this complex and interesting, but people like to play this style of deck, and you're not providing...
You are 100% correct.
May you have something to add?
You are 100% correct. We have those in our group. They're like, I want to draft the white and red decks. But, and I'm going to lead this in, this is because, May, I need you to sanity check me on this.
Fractured.
Is it that needs to exist either, or some combination of, number 1, a speed check for the rest of the cube? If so, why does it need to be aggro? Number 2,
went off the aggro rails.
Number 2, because the players expect it, or number 3, because the players enjoy it.
No, I'm actually really glad they're answering that, because it actually ties back to what I was asking Nathan. Of when you are looking at your environment, and this will be me reiterating my question to you. When you are looking at your environment, Nathan, when you're looking at your top end, your packages, whatnot, what do you want players to be doing in the early game, right? Aggro, we mention a lot as that kind of benchmark for, let's say, I don't want to say the cops, but they are the sort of fanboys that typically lean on. But Stu is 100% correct.
Oh, God.
It does not have to be. There are a lot of environments that have speedy combos as the kind of threshold for power. Reanimate stuff can be the threshold for speed, right? It doesn't matter how many little aggro duders that you have if you reanimated a Gristlebrand, right?
Right.
None of that has to be the benchmark. And sure, we can list out, I had 4 cards that I was planning on listing out if you were interested in fleshing out a little bit more of that early game, turning sideways, whatnot. But that doesn't
Absolutely.
have to be your goal. And that's an introspective question that you have to figure out, Nathan, where it's, what do you want your late games to look like? How do you want each of these packages to interact with said late game? And more importantly, how are you going to let players get there and contest with those resources? The reason why we mention aggro, not to go on too large of a tangent, is just because it's the typical one. It's the easy one. It's identifiable. It's identifiable for the curator. It's identifiable for the players. But this doesn't have to be true for your environment, which is why I posed it as this could be a solution rather than this is a solution for you.
Well, I think it's an important point, and I bring it up because it is the one archetype that is mentioned as that benchmark. And not that I necessarily think that we have to get away from that, right? I'm no Q police, right? That's not what we're presenting ourselves. So,
Bad boys.
let's
What you gonna do?
So let's pivot, okay? Let's switch back to allow our show note enjoyers, right? Because we've kind of gone a little bit all over the place, but I think rightly so, because these are important discussions. Let's talk about everybody's favorite permanent type. I mean, it's been everybody's favorite permanent type since day one, right?
Yeah.
Everybody loves a planeswalker.
Ever since Laura went.
Everybody loves a planeswalker.
So, aside from all so we kind of got through the. I guess you and I, we sought out. We had a couples counseling. We had an intervention. People talked to us about what happened. Anthony's tired and got tired of having his cubes picked on, so he decided to pick on yours. Whatever, right? We went through our situation. But we're better for it, right? Our relationship is strong.
Nathan,
we are cube bonded now.
Nathan, does Anthony snore at night?
I do.
Does
I
he
have
snore?
sleep apnea.
He looks like a
I do.
snorer.
I wear the big.
You
It's
look
okay.
like a snorer.
But I don't know what that means, but I think But we have went off the rails again. But what he's talking about, so we kind of went through this kind of, I guess, the addition. You've kind of done I went through for phase 1, Edward Scissorhands. You followed me. Whatever made sense, right? And so now we've talked, we've mended, we're back on point. And so now we're doing
And I want to add something real quick. I didn't take absolutely every single thing that he put. Those 59 suggestions. There was quite a few that we debated on and came up with actually some better solutions just from talking about it. So it was actually a very beneficial experience. In fact, and again, I'm not going to derail this, but it actually helped me go back to my Ghostbusters cube and really think about it in a different way. And I cut 30 cards from that as well. So
I did not,
really
by the way.
actually
I had nothing
found
to do with that.
overall.
Don't accuse me.
And
I had nothing to do with
he
those
has
30
not
cards.
been involved in that at all. But his suggestions made me rethink it and go, oh, well, this is something I like, and this is something I don't like. And just, so anyway, don't want to derail us, but I just wanted to say that, when we got through the whole thing, I actually found such benefits from it that I was actually able to apply it to a whole different cube.
So we're going to take 2 cards, and I don't know if I can read them because there's a lot of print on them, but I'm going to do my very best. Actually, Stu, you have a lovely accent.
I'll be the resident.
There's 2 of them. I'm going to talk about these 2 cards. So go through, and I need these cards read in their entirety. It's
Okay.
gonna be painful.
So number 1 is going to be, so these are 2 red planeswalkers. They're 2 Sarkhan. So first one, Sarkhan, the Dragon Speaker, 3 colorless and 2 red. +1 until end of turn, Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker becomes a legendary 4/4 red dragon creature with flying, indestructible, and haste. Doesn't lose loyalty while he's not a planeswalker. -3, Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker deals 4 damage to target creature, and then -6, you get an emblem with, at the beginning of your draw step, draw 2 additional cards, and at the beginning of your end step, discard your hand.
All
right?
we're
Pretty
gonna pause.
juicy.
We're going to hit pause real quick. This is the card I suggested, and my logic behind it, and I forget what the cut was, is it was on point, about power band level, somewhere in the middling kind of thing, a top end, a 4/4 dragon that also had built-in removal. So I presented this to you, and this is where we're going to do a little bit so people can see this live. We're going to do this live right now. You and I are going to go back to marriage counseling again. So I present this card to you because it's form and function, and I want to make a counterpoint. The reason why what had kind of happened a little bit in the conversation, and when I started doing my deep dive, my delirium conversation that I had, I noticed you had kind of some disconnects or associations between different. There was no path for me to follow. Every time I drafted your cube in the middle of the night before I got past the 14 wraths, I started kind of getting these generic kind of just piles. And I started noticing over and over again, no matter how many times I tried, I kept getting a pile. And I wanted this deck to look like something that I could be proud of, but I got a pile. No offense, but that's kind of that's what prompted a lot of this. And that all sounds terrible saying it out loud. But it was kind of because things were just kind of plug in a degree of they were legendary. Am I wrong?
Right.
There was thought.
Yeah,
I know there was thought.
Well, there was, I mean, we didn't have a lot of, factions necessarily. It was just sort of like, this is legendary for this color group, and this fits this style of play. This is what I want this guild to be. So I made some weird choices for cards that really aren't that great, but that I thought, okay, this fits into the guild mechanic I want to support here. And it was definitely a little disjointed when it comes to that.
So I presented Sauron as kind of a top end to appease whatever I cut. It was literally like almost a 1-for-1 5-drop. That doesn't matter to the listeners so much as I just thought this card did a lot of things. And back to the discussion we have, and I still lean towards the first one, but can you read the second one, please? And I'll explain my logic.
You can. And I'm going to tell you why I lean towards the first one so heavily. Number one, it can deal with a threat. Yep. And number two, it can become the threat. It doesn't require any kind of setup. It's something that if that sort of power band begins in that 4 to 5 mana sort of, region, it can operate so elegantly, regardless of your board state.
It's a beautiful card.
It's a beautiful card. Okay, so the second one is Sarkhan, the Master. Oh, God, I so want to say Masterclass.
He's Masterclass.
I so want to say.
I heard you paused.
All right. So
we're going to keep that.
It's intentionally. So this is Sarkhan the Disaster class. Sorry, Sarkhan the Master class. 3 colorless and 2 red, legendary planeswalker Sarkhan. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, each dragon you control deals 1 damage to that creature. First thing I think of, you better have some dragon.
A lot of them.
Better have some dragon support in this bad boy for that to be relevant.
You're leading me down that path as a drafter.
+1 until end of turn. Each planeswalker you control becomes a 4/4 red dragon creature and gains flying. Ooh.
It's pretty good.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
Good, yeah.
And then -3 creates a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying.
Okay, let's pause. Nathan, let's run through our kind of this is if you're okay with this. Let's pause. Literally pause. Are you okay with what I'm about to do next? Because it's just to break down our process. You and I have had exchanges. So I kind of want to bring the listeners into this process. The reason why we're doing this, or the reason why we're doing this for the benefit, it's for you, so they can see what you and I are doing for an exchange, so they can apply this to their individuals in their group. And there's a lot involved here, right? So the first one we did was Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker, and then you pointed, I really like this Sarkhan the Masterless, all right? And your reasons were fine, but could you please state for the listeners, literally verbatim, what you presented to me, and this is just so they can understand the process. What was the reason for the inclusion of this?
So I like the idea of somebody kind of pulling together like a Super Friend sort of deck. I definitely had a couple planeswalkers in the different colors. So I thought, it wasn't really going to be one of my main things, but I thought that if somebody wanted to build that, they could. And they could throw in enough. There's a few dragons in there, plus that second ability turns all of your creatures into dragons. So the idea that you could, kind of work something out with him to do that and just work sort of a planeswalker idea. But I totally can see looking at them side by side and understanding how they function. That first one has a little bit more, even though they are the exact same casting cost, has a little bit more flexibility to it.
I want to say this.
It doesn't mislead your drafters. Is ultimately
it doesn't. But here's what I will say. Let's say that we're sitting down to draft this cube, and I pull this card out randomly, and I say, "Hey, why should I draft this card?" Right? If you gave me the explanation that you just did, I am not in a million years drafting that card. If I look at Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker and I say, why should I draft this card? And they say, because it can end the game or it can remove a threat. That's it. 2 lines, and I already want to draft that card. Having a card where it's like, well, maybe this and maybe that and maybe the other, my alarm bells are going off immediately. And I think I already have got a pretty high bar for what I expect of a 5-drop, but for me to have to sort of manage all of the other things that have to go on sort of in this very perfect and ideal sequence in order to make that valuable, I'm already turned off by it.
So, May, I want to kind of ask you this question. Is this something that is this a trap? Looking at these two cards, it could be a build around. Say for example, in Chill MTGs or Chill's Dragons of Winter's Night, this card would have more form and function, and you could build around it, right? But what if you had in a 360 cube, say 10 dragons, and they're all different shapes and sizes? Doesn't matter. Mana values all over the place. Doesn't matter. Do you see where this type of card, while it's interesting and certain cubes can lean into it, we kind of lean towards the utilitarian function. Would you agree with that? We want the one that does the attack, remove. But not all players want that. Do you agree with our assessment, or where do you land? I really want to hear this.
Sure. So I actually do agree with Stu that when you're assessing like which cards that you should swap out, keep in mind what the floor case is, what the ceiling case is, and more importantly, what the card can be interpreted as are all kind of different facets that you have to keep track of. And while I can kind of see your vision for the Master List, I feel like just having generically good cards like the previous Sarkon does you a lot more favors than it does you a lot more harm. But I'm definitely guilty of I'm trying to do a cool, fun thing over the generically good thing, right? And I respect that.
Which takes us down this path of like the dichotomy or the contradiction that's happening here. So you've got Anthony from the very beginning saying, let's do things to make this cube less generic, less just a mash, right? I said that. I literally said that to you. And we're friends. We talked about it. Then I'm telling you, on the other hand, I can see the confusion. Then I'm saying you should run, Sarkin, the dragon speaker, over the Master List, just because one actually just does the thing, and the other one says, well, you need to do these things, and this would be really neat. I could see where the Master List would fall into that'd be a pretty cool kind of memory making card. Would you agree? Like, that would be awesome. Like, to do that and to pull off all these things and build a dragon deck. Sarkin Dragon Speaker could be a little boring. I mean, I get it.
Yeah. Well, there is that live the dream concept, like that. And that was something that's very present in Commander. You really are kind of doing that, like, hey, I might get to do the thing. And we have some people in our play group, one of the people in our play group that would love to, like, go for the weird way to possibly win. And, I could see that as being something, helpful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can also look at it from, an outside view and just say, okay, well, I see what I was trying to do, but, let's be a little logical about this. And I do want people to have fun, and my fun might not be the same thing as your fun. So, I am kind of trying to open myself up to that idea of, like, what makes people enjoy coming back,
So to take this all the way to the back, so there's kind of this, like, thing that we deal with as curators, right? And it's come up often in the cube community. Build the cube the way you want to build it, play the cards you want to have that make you have fun. I get and I respect that. But you're right, there's 7 other people sitting here. So how do you balance whatever's fun to other people, right? That's the real challenge that we're always trying to overcome here. And you kind of said, like, what is the stop point where this cube is no longer mine and it's become someone else's? I get that too. That was one of the core elements. Anthony copied my cube. He just cut it to pieces, and then he told me.
How dare you?
I know, right?
Because
you can't handle the cube, Stu. But the point is,
listen, I'm Tom Cruise over here. I don't need to handle anything.
You're like, what are you, like 5'2"? So
maybe.
Yeah, I went over a cuckoo's nest, but. Yeah, nobody else gets that unless they're really old. But it's a great film.
Did you fly over it by any chance?
I might have flown over it.
Okay, good.
Yeah. You know who can fly over it? Sarkin.
I would imagine any dragon can fly over it. Anyway.
Moving back to this thing. So we kind of talked about all these kind of ideas of how do you process it? How do you mold it? What's the overstep? Anthony did that. I'm just going to tell you. But now we're building into the cube is becoming... None of them are ever done. They're living objects. May knows this. I know that. You're learning that. They're never going to end, right? You're going to sit down at UberCubeathon and someone's going to tell you, I don't like Sarkin. I think Sarkin's dumb. You can't stop that. There's no way to do it. But you might think, do they have a point? And there's a new Sarkin coming out, by the way. It's going to make this even harder, right? Now you're going to have this new deliberation point. Do I need this one? Does this one do what I need to do? I think it's a 2-drop. It's never ending. You have to decide as a curator, what's your stop point, where the interventions come from. And as May stated so eloquently, you have to learn how to register this feedback and determine which one is important to you. But at the same time, what's most important to Anthony, because that's what really matters.
Well, oh my goodness, Anthony. Well, here's a deliberation point, okay? I'm going to present these. So, Nathan, you said yourself that you're a Commander player, a Commander enjoyer. I think that may be sort of not doing yourself enough justice. I would argue that you are just a Magic enjoyer, period. You enjoy cube drafting. You enjoy playing Commander. You've enjoyed it when we've had boxes of Magic to draft and play Limited and anything else, right? Planes Chase. Nathan is a broad Magic enjoyer, right? In general. Let's give you the credit that you deserve. When I look at any list where Commander has been any kind of inspiration or there's been any kind of metric about that, right? And I'm going to add, and this is more of a question than just me telling you how much I love you and how wonderful you are, but how much consideration when you look at the choices that you've made, and I think the 2 Sarkhans are a great sort of metric and a good starting point. If I was someone, and I haven't yet, but maybe I'll go down this path, if I was looking at building a cube that was catering in no small part for EDH players, Commander players, or players that enjoy playing Magic where the vibe of Commander kind of is the primary, vibe for the table, do you look at these cards and think, or even you could math this out, would I include this card in a Commander deck? And that's difficult because Commander is a multiplayer format, Cube is a 1v1 format, but really it just comes down to card quality and card fun. Because as a Commander player, I don't always just want my cards to be powerful. I want my cards to be fun most of the time for myself. Very, very occasionally, Anthony, I know you're judging me right now. Please don't judge me, but there are times where I do think about fun for the table. Okay, I do it from time to time.
Boo.
Non-zero, I know, all that kind of stuff. But I think there's an important point for that because when you're playing Commander, you do have 3 other players at the table that you'd have some kind of consideration about for the most part, right? I don't want to just build degenerate combo decks every time.
I will say Nathan is the maestro of fun. When I go to one of his...
He is the maestro of fun.
We go to one of his Commander events, he is making sure the entire party...
There's always pizza.
We're having fun.
There's always scotch.
He wants to make sure everybody's happy.
There's always snacks. It's always a good time.
So that is part of the context of this design that people have to take into account, right? And that's hard for me sometimes when I'm looking at it as kind of... I'm not a competitive player, but I do want to kind of find all the edges in a cube, right? And so I have to try to... It's interesting. I was going to put this on you, but I'm going to put it on myself. I was saying when Nathan's designing a cube, right, you have to think about the person in the other seat, but I should probably think about the person designing the cube as being the other seat. It's a reflection on a lot of different scenarios, right? It's easy for us to think we're on the high ground, and clearly, Anakin was not on the high ground.
I think you have to position yourself that way, though, right? You have to, there's kind of there's the fun police analogy, and even going back to the whole like aggro is the police of the pacing strategy for the cube. You are the person that's taking on that role for every aspect of that design and decision making process, right? You're the one that's determining how fast the cube can be. You're the one that's determining how fun the cube can be. You want to not include mill in your cube because you know that the rest of your group absolutely despises it. And if it was me and the rest of my group absolutely despised mill, I would make sure that I included as much mill as possible in my cube because to heck with you, I enjoy it. But there's other more reasonable people out there that might think, no, I don't want to include that, right? And so the fun aspects has got to be such a huge consideration. But also, if I know that I'm catering to a certain type of player, that I'm probably, and when I say certain type, it's going to be, do you favor certain archetypes? Are you willing to play longer games? Are you willing to even just put your Commander decks back in your bag for a Saturday afternoon and hang out with me and play this cube? Like, all of those are such tight considerations. All of those are such important processes and decisions as far as, this process is concerned. And I will say this, right? And I want to go all the way back to the very, very beginning when we were talking about wraths and we were talking about, that emotional attachment, May, that you so beautifully put, right? You've got so many players, like they have an emotional attachment to their commander decks, and the curators of the cubes have their emotional attachments to their cube. I will say, for myself, as a very, very experienced commander deck constructor, right, and I would consider myself a pretty darn good commander deck builder, right, and I am willing to spend tens, hundreds of hours doing every search, every Scryfall advanced search. I feel like I know that pretty much like the back of my hand at this point, to make sure that I'm putting together something with synergy and something that's fun for myself, something that creates tension points for my group. I can absolutely, knowing my limitations, like I have with the soon-to-be, whatever, the Diablo cube. I'm working on this new cube. What I've done, and I've certainly reached out to the Anthonys and the Chris's and May, in our various groups. How I've been able to manage this emotionally is I am fully emotionally attached to the aesthetics and the vibe of the cube. I have completely emotionally detached myself from every single card that I have included in that cube. I don't care about a single one of them or a single grouping of them more than I care about that I want this cube to come to fruition, be fun for my group, and something that can be a sort of a point of pride for me, right, as someone who enjoys cube.
I want to kind of do this as a sticking point before we close out here. So let's talk about mana drain, something you brought up. This was in the Wayback Machine, I don't know, might have been 6 months, a year ago, don't know. We argued about the idea of mana drain within this environment. It was in the original context of the original build. And then you migrated it over because it's a powerful card, and you had access to one. You loved it. Where do you land now? And I'm not talking about the card Mana Drain, but where does it land as far as like what you've learned? How do you feel? Has it progressed? Is it bigger than it was, or is it not needed? Where are you?
Yeah, so, when we discussed it, I was very connected to it in just the idea of a big play. Something where somebody does the big thing. They got the thing, and then you're like, I mana drain it. I get all that mana, and I come back. But then we discussed about how there was kind of like a feel bad to it. And then, once we kind of, thought about that more, it really made us, like, when we were discussing, like, the new changes, want to look at those cards that, like, yeah, they're really powerful and they do have that big effect on the game, but does the other person actually have fun with that? And one of the big ones that was one I was, that I really loved that we ended up having to cut for, because I as I said, I do love Reanimator, is the card Reanimate. Very powerful card, but if you get it out really early, the opponent's game is just done, and they really didn't have a lot of answers. So so that was another one that we thought about, like, yeah, that's a really fun thing. Like, I'm going to drain myself for 13 and cast that Emrakul, the Promised End. And then, and then who knows, maybe the next turn they sacrifice target creature. Okay, well, I did the thing. I got to have fun with it. But Reanimate was just so unbalanced in comparison. And so we just sort of did the same thing. We looked at that as like, yeah, that's a great big thing that we could do. It's fun for one person, but like in the context of the game and like in the whole idea of it, that's just something that's just not going to work. So overarching, as we kind of talked about this, and again, my apologies for my original presentation of how I managed this. I was tired. Okay. I'm like, well, it's not something that I would recommend other people do. I shouldn't just take Stu's new Diablo cube. I'm like, I'm going to clone it, and then I'm going to cut all these cards, and then I'm going to tell him how he should make it better. I don't want to. This is not a knock on anybody. But I will say this: I would not be mad. In fact, I would almost argue that because of my lack of I'm certainly not as experienced as really either a cube curator or a Magic player as far as Nathan is. I can say that I am emotionally attached to it, but I would value the feedback more. So but I'm still going to play the villain in the story. So May, I'm going to copy the fake cube tonight, and then I'm going to send you all the things that I think should make this better. How do you respond to that? I'm the villain.
I say go for it.
You guys are not helping my villain warfare here.
I know. I'm completely pulling the rug from underneath.
Well, hang on. It's different.
However,
it's different. Can I just say this? Yeah. It's different, right? It's different between May and I. It's different for me because I am new to it. I'm a noob, right? You should, as a much more experienced curator than I am, have some good suggestions. And I am well within my right to say, yes, those are good ideas, and no, those are bad ideas. But from May, you have got no chance of improving her cube. I would like you to do that, because we'll do a full episode on here's how Anthony completely embarrassed himself by attempting to improve the Fae cube.
And I want to add one more piece for my own personal sanity. This is my own little, I'm sitting inside the booth right now telling Nathan, we're going to call you Minister Nathan, I'm telling you, I never touched your Ghostbuster cube because that was your ground up build. This is your baby. You designed it completely up, other than verbal confirmation while we're working on it, right? But nor would I ever, and I told you this with total assurance, I will never I'm going to copy the Ghostbuster cube and make it better. This was a clone that you then made into your own, and you brought us some of the residual stuff from it. And then the clone got played by us, and then I felt like I could kind of tweak this clone a little bit. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I did the thing. So as we close out, Nathan, what have you learned in regards to,
as far as Anthony?
Besides Anthony's
what have you learned about Anthony and how not to listen to him when it comes to curating your cube?
That's fair.
No, I think, when it comes to things like that, you get this personal connection to the cards that you've put together. And in this case, I cloned it. So, I mean, it was somebody else's that I had to try to make my own and try to see what I could do to kind of improve it in my eyes. And, once I got that little base level down, okay, I was like, all right, cool. It's, people are enjoying it. So I think it's really just comes down to being open and just being like, you know what? I'm like, had this been a situation where I had said, you know what, Anthony, I'm having trouble with my cube. I don't feel like it's going to be as much fun. Could you look it over and make some changes for me? That's a totally different story. I think that's one thing where we're kind of saying, hey, I really would love to have your advice. And I do actually really love to have your advice. I like having, other people look at it and analyze it just because I'm still really trying to learn how to do it. But it gets abrupt if it's all of a sudden, I didn't really ask and you kind of just did this thing. And that's kind of where it really came from. And again, once I really understood the meaning behind it, and that there really it wasn't something where you were just like, you know what, I've got a cube that's going to be in my UberCubeathon. I got to make sure that it's as good as all the other ones. So here's what I'm going to do. As long as it wasn't that, I know that's not where you were coming from. And it taught me to just be a little more open and to just look at my own cubes just with fresh eyes.
To kind of wrap things up and bring us to our much needed conclusion here, I think that it is important for us to remember that when we are looking at our cubes and looking at either the criticism that we're asking for or the criticism that we're not, it is important to kind of remember that you're the creator. This is your pet project. Sometimes it's good to take your kind of top-down lens off and let somebody else give you advice for a bit. And sometimes it's good to just hold your ground and be like, no, this is kind of the identity that I'm wanting to go for. And I think that you have a pretty good idea of the vision that you're going for and the direction that you're wanting to go. And I think that even though we didn't get into the nitty-gritty of this list, I feel like that this cube in particular has come a long way from when we brought it first to UberCubeathon. And I think that that's something that you should be proud of. And the reason that I'm noting this is because there's a lot of people that tend to get discouraged or feel like that there's this wrong or right way to build your cube, and there's not. We are learning, we're growing, and we're adapting the cube into the play experience that we are wanting to curate. And that is the ending note that I'd like to leave with.
Beautiful.
Yep, she
You'll
does.
stop learning when you're dead.
Yep, stop dropping mics.
Yeah, stop.
Could you move us to the socials, please?
Oh my gosh, I can't top that.
I can't. No.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. We're out. Peace out.
I'm retired. May, thank you for taking over all responsibilities for UberCube for the rest of our lives.
May, you can't handle the cube. Stu, can you take us to socials, please?
First of all, to Patrick, Jeff, Nick, Chris, Timber Dragon, Brian, Keaton, Lord Justice, Nick, Preston, and Sam. Huge thank you to all of you guys for your ongoing support through our patreon.com/UberCube. As always, really means a lot to the show, helps us keep the lights on over here at the podcast, and we love to keep bringing you guys new content and new episodes. again, big thank you to all of you guys. It really goes a long way. UberCubeathon 2025, 64 players, 17 cubes, Swiss format, lots of prizes, glory, and fun. April 26th at the Gathering Place in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We've got the link in our show notes. If you're in the area, or even if you feel like jumping on a plane and hanging out in North Carolina for a weekend, we would love to see you there. Still just a few tickets remaining, but we can guarantee it's going to be a phenomenal experience. And as we mentioned earlier, there's some pretty incredible prizes and raffles that are going to be in place for that. So we hope to see you there. It's going to be a great time. We are now a TCG affiliate. If you want to go into the show notes and use our affiliate link to go order your cards for your cubing or whatever other Magic experience, it really goes a long way to supporting the show. And if you're looking for some advice on your cube,
Not
let
from
me
Anthony.
tell you.
Not from Anthony.
Facebook.com/groups/MTG Cube. Are we at 1,000?
We're well over.
Are we at 2,000? All right, we're at 1,000.
Yes.
That's good enough. We're over 1,000. A lot of people in there. Lots of cool discussion about Cube going on in there. Go over there to check out. If you need some advice, I mean, you can also use our Discord. But I mean, it's that's good. There's more play. There's a lot of people there.
There's a lot.
All right, inkgaming.com/UberCube. If you're looking for some playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, custom and large volume products available, we are at UberCube MTG Pod at Twitter. You can also reach us via email, ubercubemtgpodcast@gmail.com. Come hang out with us on the Discord, patreon.com/UberCube. Again, to all of our Patreons, a huge thank you for the ongoing support. But really, let's talk about ubercubemtgpodcast.bsky.social. And at YouTube, UberCube MTG Podcast 747.
And other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is...
You can handle the truth.